What is up, DMV basketball fans? Welcome into another Believe in DMV Hoops. I'm Matt Modderno. Joining me today here is Colby Giacubeno of Inside Maryland Sports and Made Hoops. Colby, how are you? How are things? You've been hitting everywhere in the DMV, it seems like. So I'm looking forward to catching up with you here.
Yeah, I'm good, Matt. I'm good. It's that time of year, just fall workouts, open gym. I feel like we never stop anymore, which is both good and bad. But yeah, man. I mean, if those kids weren't able to get off their feet for a couple of weeks later in August, they're gonna be a little bit run down at this point. But
Yeah.
hey, it is what it is. Everybody's getting used to this calendar, and I think I think this fall in particular has been really good in terms of kids just getting more attention and more college coaches getting out there.
Uh, Kudos to you for helping them get some of that attention too, and that's a really cool thing for me to follow. So if anybody's listening to this and you like local basketball or local basketball recruiting, you got to follow Colby. So make sure you're doing that. Probably already are if you're listening to this, but just in case. I look forward to the Inside Maryland Sports updates all the time as a Terp fan, so I want to start there. But first, we're brought to you by Stateside Vodka and their Surfside Hard Iced Teas, Hard Lemonades, and BetOnline. It's your number one source for all your betting needs in summer sports this season, especially with the NFL picking back up. That's a big one. Get the latest stats, news, and scores available for your favorite teams, the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports, and head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so the Terps just announced that Marcus Jackson, a Baltimore product who's going to be playing at Compass Prep in Arizona this year, has signed basically right after his official visit. I guess, Colby, what did you hear about that visit? Was like this kind of a done deal before he got there, or was it something special on the visit that like really sold him? Any insight into that?
Yeah, no, it wasn't a done deal at all.
Okay.
In fact, I mean, it caught me by surprise, and it was something that kind of came together very quickly. Um, Marcus has had an interesting recruitment in that if you were, familiar with the Baltimore area, or if you frequent in the Baltimore area, follow high school hoops, whatnot. When I remember watching him as a sophomore at Edmondson Westside, everybody kept telling me I had to go down and watch this kid. So I get down there, and he's obviously got the size, he's got the raw athleticism, he's a lefty, all that, this, that, and the third. But he still needed a lot of work, just in terms of polish, in terms of know-how, footwork. It was just more so like he played around the rim, throw it up, he'll go get it, make a few plays. But what I did, just putting in the back of my head as I was watching that game was, with how aggressive that he visited the free throw line a lot, and his jumper is not ugly whatsoever. Like you would not. When you look at him, you would think like, you talk about left hand and he gets that load up and it's behind his head and you're like, oh boy. But it's actually, he's got great touch, comes out of his hands, really well. And there's a lot to work with. I'll say that. So, then he makes the move to John Marshall. He stays there for a year, has his highs and lows. And then I would say, this past spring and summer is where he really got on the national radar. He did so at different camps as well. MBPA top 100, so on and so forth. But what I would say is I know that the Auburn offer was very meaningful to him when they first came in. SEC, I think, even though he's committed to Maryland, I always said, like, I thought I could very well see Marcus playing in the SEC.
Yeah, they always have high-end athletes and things like that. That makes sense for him.
Yep, get the athletes, and we'll figure out the in-betweens later, but we need these type of guys. So with that being said, I was always kind of monitoring that situation. I was told he went on a few campuses kind of under the radar prior to Maryland. There was really no leader. I just thought that it was kind of, when Auburn wanted to pull the trigger and apply pressure, they would get it done. So that all leads up to, Maryland really had been monitoring him, and, the addition of, Coach Norris and obviously, Ricky Harris on the coaching staff, those being Baltimore guys, is only going to up those antes in that. And then you have, Greg Manning's familiarity with the area. So once they were able to get him on campus, and I think, with Marcus going away to Arizona this year, I think, I would just say this, like his mother in particular wants her son nearby, but wants him a little bit far away, knowing that, he's getting taken care of and he's on the right path. But it was just really that visit, the way that they laid out, their sites for how they would use him. I know a very big pitch was about him and Derik playing together
Makes sense.
next year. And I think for both of them, that would be a very, very big deal because it would, those two and their chemistry would show different aspects of their game further than, what people already know.
Yeah.
So to answer your question in a very long-winded form, it was that visit, man. And I think the thought of being at home, the thought that they have so many Baltimore guys on staff, around the staff, whatnot, there was a lot of comfort that he would be taken care of. Whereas with Auburn, now I'm not going to sit here and say if Marcus would have went on that Auburn visit the same weekend to Maryland, yes, different conversation right now. But with that being the case, Maryland acted quickly and they capitalized on a prospect that has a very high ceiling.
I think so much of what I've heard from high school kids is they like teams that show them the love, and the fact that Maryland was like there and ready to pull the trigger. I mean, I'm sure it had a large part to do with that. You mentioned the fit with Queen, like they seem to complement each other really well. Like what each of them does, it kind of, would hide some deficiencies for the other, or also they can kind of boost each other's, current strength. So that makes a lot of sense. Are these guys like pretty tight? Like I know they're from the same area, but it doesn't always necessarily mean that they go way back. Do they have a long history?
Yeah, I mean, and this is just basing it off of my knowledge. I wouldn't say that they're like the best of friends,
Sure,
but they're definitely close. I mean,
okay.
they're obviously aware of each other. They both played for Team Thrill.
Mhm.
And then, also it's just the fact of when they would be in the gym, it's not always where Thrill would practice. It's strictly 17s and it's strictly 16s. Like,
I guess.
they're going to join those guys together sometimes and make each
Mhm.
other better. Where I think that, Marcus could help unlock another portion of Derik's game, which Derik's going to put, the country on notice about his vision and his feel, and throw passes that you don't even realize that he can do.
Sure.
That will be normal to the people who've been watching him for a while. But with Marcus coming into the fold, you can allow Derik to play, more at the high posts or more at the
Mhm.
top of the key. And I can just see it now, Derik drives, he's at a half spin and he just throws it up and
Lob, yeah.
Marcus is coming baseline and he's gonna finish the job. Um, and vice versa. There's a lot of different layers to it. But on the other side of it, on the other side of the ball, where it would be coming, what's the biggest, I would say, blemish in Derik's game that people want to go, hey, how's he going to defend in space?
Mhm.
How's he going to keep a guy? The big conversation between him and Juju, like, how are you going to play both them on the same court? What if, or on the court at the same time? What if they have an athletic four that makes them play out on the perimeter? Well, if you're in that case, which I'm confident in the coaching staff that they'll scheme, away from that.
Mhm.
But Derik gets blown by, you got to meet Marcus at the rim. And Marcus is very, very willing to meet you there. And
Love
then,
that.
with that being said, like Derik brings a little bit more IQ, I would say, to that end of the floor on timing and
Mhm.
different rotations where maybe Marcus, any freshman, I think defense is just another language once you enter the college ranks. And that's where Derik is going to help pick him up. So a lot of different aspects, but no, their chemistry I feel like will be great. And they're both very unselfish. Marcus just wants to win. Derik wants to win as well, but he wants to make it as easy as possible. I would say make his
Mhm.
job as easy as possible, and Marcus will help that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think Terps fans are already excited about next year just hearing that. You mentioned the makeup of the staff there. It felt like for so long Maryland was not getting any real traction in the Baltimore area, and now it's kind of shifted, right? Like it seems like there's a lot of noise with Baltimore recruits specifically. Is that something they prioritized with the way they've built out this staff? Do you know, or like is this just kind of a happy accident that that's where these guys have connections? I'm just curious. Like it seems like we're hearing a lot more Baltimore names than we had the previous like decade almost.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's definitely not a coincidence, right? Because I mean, they bring guys home from the area who have ties,
Mhm.
and who have the connections. And I think a big thing, you come from a city like Baltimore and or any Detroit or one of these cities that are very high in a crime rate. Like
Mhm.
here in Baltimore, loyalty is very important. I would say that. So once you're locked in with somebody, and I know this is kind of like a blanket statement, like that's how humans are. Like if I
Yeah.
can trust you, yada yada. But it
Yeah.
goes further with the different things that these, whether they're adults or kids, have to deal with, and have had to deal with at a very young age. So, once you're locked in and you're tied in, that means something. So I think that will definitely help matters. But what I will say is, I wouldn't really consider Baltimore a very drowning in talent within the past, whether you look at the next 2 years, 3 years. Obviously, there are a lot of big fish in more of the DMV area. For people watching, like, the DMV is not Baltimore. That's the case. So
it's a big point of contention for sure.
So, but with that being said, when you have the big fish in Baltimore, you got to go get it. And even though, people can do a deep dive on Marcus and it might take a while to find out that he is a Baltimore guy, he very much is a Baltimore kid. So I think it'll help their connections. What I will say is, with Norris, or people, refer to him here as Stink, Coach Stink, like, he is not afraid to enter any room and give it a whirl. You know what I mean? And where a lot of times you're going to be told no to that, there are some times where you get lucky. And I don't want to say it was luck. But I would say, if you asked me, if we did this podcast 2 months, 3 months ago, and you said, look, I'm going to give you a list of prospects, you give me the likelihood on whether they would be wearing a Maryland jersey, Marcus would have probably been one of the lowest on that list.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot of traction to make up pretty quickly or late in the game here.
Yeah. And I mean, I will say this too, like, Marcus was an impressionable guy, and he would like to be, I think he would like to be, close to home too. There's a sense of pride. There's a sense of, let me bring that spark back to Maryland, all of that. So I think once they took a deeper dive into that perspective, Marcus was won over. But prior to that, I thought it was just kind of like a courtesy visit at that point. But they got it done, and they got go-getters. So that's why.
I think as a staff, you still happily take a courtesy visit, because you never know who you can sway or convince, or when something will click for them too. So even that kind of stuff, it's worth the flyer, I think. For
sure.
Speaking of what may end up, sort of being a courtesy visit here, the Cam Ward, Largo star, he's been kind of the big name for Terps fans for the last couple of years here. Where's Maryland at with him? Do we think there's any realistic chance that he ends up here at this point, or is he just kind of doing them a solid by continuing through with the visit?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback, Matt, off the statement that I just said, is that if we were doing this podcast a couple months ago and you asked me who was low, like, well, if we fast forward to now, I would say it's very low chance that Maryland gets Cam. However, look what happened with Marcus. So what do I know? But what I will say is, like, Cam has a long list of suitors. He'll go to Maryland. He still has Michigan State. He still has Alabama. He added a visit to Mississippi State after all of those. From my knowledge, Marquette is still in the thick of things. He was very impressed with his visit at Virginia, and Virginia may be getting a very good prospect locally here in the coming days, coming weeks, that Cam might be, might sway him a little bit to think about Virginia a little bit longer.
That Chance Mallory, or
I'm going to continue going through the programs, Matt. But
I hear you. Fair enough. I got you.
Very good. But yeah, man, it's interesting with Cam. You talk to him and he highlights all the different programs and what's so great about him. You ask him about Maryland. He's like, look, they're the hometown school. They have
he said nice stuff. I'll take that.
They have an edge because of that. Like, I'm interested in, hearing them out. What I will say is, obviously when Mike Jones took the Old Dominion job, that kind of lagged everything. But, from what I heard, like, what I will say is this, like, and the coaching staff, we just talked about this, does a great job. David Cox lives in gyms, like, and me and him joke all the time, just because, like, if people say that I live in gyms, David Cox lives in gyms. And I think,
good to hear as a fan. Yeah.
I think out of the, I mean, I would just say 8 or whatever gyms that I've been in so far since workouts opened up. I think I've been in this gym with him for 7 of them. Like, it's literally been like every one. I mean, he even made a joke to me when I walked in the other day at Georgetown Prep. I was just like, look, man, we might as well just get together and
carpool.
Match out, map out our weekly trips. But But I say all that to say him and Willard have been in to see Cam. Michigan State continues to do their due diligence with him, like at a very impressive rate. But it's too hard to tell. I would absolutely, you know me, I can do the crystal balls. I can do this. I can do that. If I had an idea, I'd probably put one in. But with Cam, I have no clue. So it's going to be interesting. We'll be following the visit very closely this weekend because, again, just like Marcus, man, you never know. You never know how it's gonna go. But I know that the staff, probably thinks that it's an uphill battle this weekend, but it was an uphill battle a couple of weeks ago, and it ended in their favor.
Yeah, there was a point in time where like the Derik Queen recruitment looked like it was getting away from him a little bit too, and they pulled that off. And now you also have someone like Derik on campus, and you hear from a lot of guys like he's a personality and he kind of has that Pied Piper vibe to him too. And we've heard that about Cam. So maybe that's something where there's a little connection there and they can get something going. You mentioned Michigan State. There's another person that they're seemingly going hard after locally, and that's Jordan Scott, son of Christy Winter Scott, who's a Maryland legend for anybody who's not familiar with him. But he seems to have a smaller list, and Maryland's, I don't know, in the running there with Virginia Tech and Michigan State. So is that one a better chance? He was in on the recruiting visit with Marcus Jackson as well. Like I don't know, is that a long shot as well, I guess, at this point, Colby?
I wouldn't say it's a long shot. I wouldn't categorize it as that. I didn't expect Jordan to commit on his visit, despite all of I would say, the chips that are in Maryland's favor there, as you mentioned, with his mother. But I always kind of knew that Jordan was going to see the process out. I know Virginia Tech they're doing all they can. They were just in, I believe, this morning for him, head coach, 3 assistants. So, they're going all in for him. Michigan State, they win the long game. They were the I don't know if they were the first high major or first Power 5 to offer him, but if they weren't first, they were first or second, and they have been, foot on the gas since then and making constant trips this way. So it'll definitely be interesting to watch how this one pans out. I think Virginia Tech's going to do whatever they can to get him to commit. He'll go there this weekend, and get that visit over with. But yeah, man, I still, when you talk in circles, you're hearing a lot of Michigan State, Virginia Tech, but then you hear like, hey, like, do we really think he's going to go all the way out to Michigan State with him, having a close knit, family and a relationship with his mother, and how much it would mean for him to put the Maryland jersey on where his mom, made history. Like there's a lot of factors, but I would just say, again, this is another one, man, I don't feel comfortable, even predicting or throwing out what I think today, because it's an even playing field.
One person it sounds like that they're kind of made the most traction with, and you and I think Jeff Ehrman have both put in crystal balls for this, is Christian Jeffrey out of Mount Zion Prep locally here too. Does this one seem like you put the crystal ball in, Colby, so you feel pretty good about that one, right? If they want to get it done, they'll get it done.
I do feel good about Christian. Number one, I think he just embodies a Big Ten guard. He's built like a linebacker, and he just has, the downhill prowess, the toughness, everything that Willard really likes in guards. Just in terms of when he's on the ball presence, he's going to bring a guy who is, ready to and I can kind of explain this, but participate in practice from day one. A lot of these kids aren't even ready for a college practice. But Chris, he's got the frame, he's got the competitiveness, he's got the, the toughness from where he comes from. And he's, a lot of people just want to, like, I see a lot on message boards or whether it's Twitter or whatnot. Like, I guess everybody just thinks he's going to put his head down and try to get to the rim. And like, that's not his game. Like, that's a strength. Don't get me wrong.
He can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, he can create, he sees the game very well. Obviously the jump shot is the blemish there, and he continues to work on that. But if you're talking about making a point guard in a lab that's ready to contribute in the Big Ten conference, that's, physical as any, if not more, it's Christian Jeffrey. He will take a visit to Penn State this weekend.
Okay.
Penn State is, or that was the last that I heard. Penn State is in the mix with a lot of different guards. Their pitch to Chris is going to be, hey man, you can come in and play right away. Yep. And that's nothing to scoff at. It's nothing to scoff at with him going up to a massive campus like that where the fan base is rabid, just for all sports pretty much. So there's always kind of a worry there. But from what I've gathered, I feel like Maryland has done an outstanding job getting him and recruiting him. I remember having the same conversation. I think it was November 5th or 7th of last year when, me and Greg Manning were sitting in the gym during an early event and we were watching Mount Zion. He was like, dude, this Chris Jeffrey kid, we need to be on him. Yep. And I was just like, yeah, I think so too. And so since that day, it's been on the gas. I will say Malachi Palmer being there plays a huge factor. Also, Mount Zion being a rock's throw away from campus is a huge factor. But hey, whatever. If you're Maryland, you're not complaining about any factors that are going to help you out.
When I saw the two of them in person in a Mount Zion game, they were literally on the bench. Both of them were out, one injured, one sick, but they were literally attached at the hip the entire couple hours we were all in the gym. And you could tell that's a meaningful relationship. And everything you hear from Malachi is hey, this is great. I'm loving it. I'm fitting in well. And the fact that I think he looks like he could contribute year one, and Christian can do the same thing. That's another, feather in their cap, I guess. And I think just seeing him play, both those guys were fairly high usage on the team and had the ball a decent amount. And that didn't seem to bother either of them. So this notion that you couldn't play Christian as a freshman because you have Jacoby Gillespie already, I don't buy that. It seems like they could even play some together. You wouldn't be the biggest backcourt, but I think Jeffrey can guard some twos at the college level and not, be bothered by that.
No, it makes sense. It's a fit that makes sense. Because of, a lot of things that you just laid out. And the fact that again, when you're putting in, say, just kind of scanning through their guards. But of course, Rodney Rice played, the point guard position when he was finished up at DeMatha, and he looked good doing it. But he's naturally a scorer. Rodney is naturally a guy who can get a bucket from all three levels. Chris isn't wired that way. Now, Chris will go get one when he needs to, but Chris is all for hey, let's, I'll get into the sets that my coach needs us to get into. I'm going to provide the physicality on defense. As you said, say you do have a Rodney Rice and Chris lineup and they're playing I don't want to say Purdue now because they're not as big, but just throw in any team. There's going to be transfers. There's going to be senior guards that you can insert Chris right into that 2 spot. I don't want to say a 3 because if you're going to 6'6", 6'7", you run into some issues, but physically it's going to be fine. I think also a big factor is as a guard in the Big Ten, playing with bigs who primarily play with their backs to the basket and lay the wood, is he can handle those screens. He can handle, maneuvering them. He's quick enough to get around them. He's quick enough to take on the contact and recover. So there's a lot of different aspects where I think it's a good fit, but there were some other programs that definitely made it interesting with them. And the fact of the matter is whether it was Jeff or myself, when we were kind of leading, hey, Maryland sits in a really good spot here. It's okay, well, why isn't it done? Yeah. You know what I mean? So there were some other, factors that were going into it, but all in all, when their number was called, I feel confident that this one will be Maryland's.
After that Alabama loss in the tournament the other year, the first thing Kevin Willard said is hey, we've got to get more athletic. And obviously Jameer was a really good athlete, but not the biggest guy. Christian's probably not the same athlete Jameer is, but he's still athletic and bigger and maybe a more physically ready player from day one. And Marcus Jackson is a top level athlete. So I think you're seeing the blueprint of the kind of guy he wants to bring in. And people, I think, have questioned, on the boards and stuff hey, they've kind of changed who they're in and out on. This isn't the original set of names from a year ago, but this does kind of default back to the types of guys they said they were going to prioritize. So I think it makes sense. And there are also guys that make sense as complementary pieces. And then you can use the portal to kind of go out and get a couple of the more marquee names and stuff like that every year, like they did with Gillespie and Selton Miguel and stuff like that.
I think that is the formula, again, depending on who the coach is, how they jive. And Willard is I would say, if I had to, again, this is just me talking, but he's the type of guy that like he's going to relate a lot better to the upper class transfer, as you said, who's kind of been through the storm, ready to just come in and win. Like, hey man, what do we got to do here? We can cut through the BS. We can cut through the, hey, you're really hyped, and let's keep that train rolling through campus and social media and all that stuff. Like, that's not what we're here for. And I feel like with those two guys, as you said, they get those two kind of like lunch pail type of dudes. You get up, go to work. They're going to work hard. They're going to do what's asked of them. Obviously, Marcus has a lot of untapped potential to be locked into, but with Chris, you get a guy who can come in from day one. I think moving forward, they prioritize maybe 2-3 high school guys, and then you go from there. But I've seen a ton on the message boards as well, not just Maryland, but everywhere. Just now that we're in this new realm of college basketball, where they're like, oh, why aren't we getting him? Why aren't we bringing all these freshmen? Like, say Kentucky is.
Well, 6 of them, yeah, right.
Correct. And again, but what I would say is there's a different formula for every team. Now, the fact that Maryland isn't, and I'm just throwing a name, I know I already mentioned them, but like isn't at a Purdue status or anything like that, where you're the elite of the conference, you're winning every single year. The fact that they're not doing that, it looks like the formula is wrong, but you get that correct mesh of guys in and finally get what, to buy into what Willard and the staff are selling. Then you have, you're going to be cooking with grease. And I think this year's team, you mentioned a name, Selton Miguel, like that's a bad dude. And that's a dude that is right up Willard's wheelhouse. And I also think that Gillespie is primed for a really big season, and I don't see anyone talking about it. But just with the skill set that he brings, that they both bring, are just, roll the ball out and we'll figure this thing out.
Deshaun Harris-Smith was on this podcast a couple weeks ago and said, like, hey, Jacoby is like a Jameer level guard, and he's really shooting that thing too. And I think he's, like you said, somebody who's going to surprise some people. And you've heard just like anybody who's been around that team, Miguel is probably like the first name that they talk about. It's just like, yeah, like you said, this is a bad dude. So I think from a chemistry standpoint, DHS talked about how locked in they are. Like, it's a greater than the sum of their parts kind of, recipe there too, I think too.
It's a good group. I think it's a really good group. I would say I'm definitely more confident for Maryland heading into this year than last. Obviously, you had the freshmen, the hype, with Deshaun coming in. You had Jamie. You had, what can this all be? Now you fast forward to this, and you're like, okay, I kind of know what every player is and what every player is going to give us. Now we just have to make the little tweaks of, okay, how do we put that player in the best position? What's the minutes looking like for him? How are we going to get him involved? Just the little nuances of it, of building the team. It's not, I think there will be a lot less of, which, Matt, I know you saw last year, but like Willard changing the starting lineup, seeing if this works. Let's try to play big. Okay.
All the tinkering that went on.
Yeah. Let's play small. Let's do this. Let's, even though we can't make a shot from 3, let's just keep launching them and wait till they fall, which I understood every single approach. Like, even though people on their couch want to say that they would have done better, you wouldn't have, or you would have been in that position. But again, like I think with college basketball, with high school recruiting, the more tangible, the more comfortable you are looking at a player and be like, oh, okay, he is this. Rather than kind of wondering if he's going to pan out, that is going to be the security blanket for the non-blue bloods, or these other Power 5 teams who were maybe in the mix a few years and then out. So again, it's just that formula and trying to find the best mix.
If it's not Christian Jeffrey, or they do go after a third guy, is there another name you're hearing? Like, that seems to be the kind of the end of the current names we hear talked about. Like, you heard Tyler Jackson a lot for a while. We heard Shane Pendergrass did a visit, like, or got an offer. Like, any other names, I guess, that you're kind of hearing a little bit about?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that, obviously they're still very much in the running for Jordan Scott, obviously, and they're not going to stop until Jordan announces a name, and if it's not Maryland. which I still give them a chance. You go Sean Abev. He canceled his visit, which is really no surprise. I didn't expect that visit to take place anyway. But he was a guy on their radar. A name that you bring up a little bit that's a little bit dated or had a lot of who I personally liked as a fit. Efeosa Oliogu. But that's kind of he's trending toward like 2 programs now, and they're one program who's been involved for a while. DMV ties, Kim English. Like I could see Kim capitalizing on that and getting every ounce of potential out of them. And then, a TCU, I know that they're involved with them. So we'll see where that goes, but just been a tough one to kind of track with Efeosa. And then Tyler, man, it's kind of been cloudy with him in terms of his recruitment. I know TCU is also on him. But I think he's just kind of trying to find his footing. Obviously he's back down to overtime elite. You see him on socials all the time, and he's doing his thing of, he can wake up and get a bucket, man. He's very, very crafty. But in terms of being high on the radar, I just don't know in terms of the group that we just got done talking about, that the guard room that the Terps have formed. I don't know where Tyler fits in that.
Yeah.
The staff might feel differently, but for me, I don't know where he fits in that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like he's a different player than like a Jeffrey, just from a skill set standpoint. Doesn't make him better or worse or whatever. It's just you've got to make those guys fit with all the other pieces we talked about. And this year's team, if it's gonna fit well, you kind of don't want to backslide, with other guys.
It's going to be playing through, Jacoby's ability on the ball. It's going to be playing through DQ and his touches. We got to feed Juju, and then we got to get, Selton involved as well. So there's a lot of different factors. Obviously, you fast forward to next year, but who knows what the roster is going to look like next year at this point. But in terms of if you would just assume the guards that are here now and could be here next year, if they're here, it's just a tough spot.
I've been very bored the last couple of weeks with no basketball to watch, so I went back and watched the FIBA under-18 Team USA team, and Mikel Brown Jr. was a name that was really impressive throughout that whole tournament and just screamed like a high-level Power 5 guard. Right away. There were some rumblings that Maryland was kind of getting in there late because of his connection with Kevin Norris. Any more on that lately? Is that just sort of like a pipe dream at this point, or do you think there is a world where they could get in there kind of, last minute?
This isn't based off any like intel that I've got, like strong intel that I've got, but for me, I think it's very much like a pipe dream at this point. Now, is the connection there? Of course. And the other thing that I haven't mentioned yet, and it's a disservice by me, but even when you're getting a Cam Ward on campus where you're like, okay, maybe we're on the outside looking in.
Sure.
We see he doesn't go somewhere, and then he's right in the portal. You know what I mean?
The bounce the boomerang recruitment, right? Like
So I mean, even with Mikel, it's hey man, let's get him on campus. Let's show him what we're about. Let's show him what we can offer. Let's show him the culture, our facilities, all that stuff. So that if he were to go elsewhere, and it doesn't work out, he's in the portal. That's an easy connection just to rekindle right then and there. But in terms of just like where his recruitment is lining up, he just finished a visit to Indiana. He's got a ton of SEC schools that are in the mix with him. Ole Miss is always a name that's kind of thrown around with him. But I feel like, again, what a guy like Mikel is looking for is like, hey, I want to come in and run the show. We got Jacoby Gillespie here. He's not going to run the show. So, and these kids are very aware of this stuff. Like that's, don't get it twisted. So there's a lot. I don't think there's any early indication as to where he will be, but I would just say like Indiana, Ole Miss, Alabama, like they're different programs that are involved. But I will say he's going to be a very good league guard for somebody.
Yeah, that was a guy that looked to me like you could see him starting next year on a big time team and actually being ready to contribute just because he was so savvy. So that was fun to watch.
For sure.
Just switching gears here a little bit to the rest of the DMV. A couple other names. I mean, this ties back to Maryland a little bit. I know there were a lot of Maryland fans that had wished they'd gone in on these two guys a little bit more, but Acaden Lewis and Eric Reibe are two names that nationally are getting full blue blood recruitment here. Any update on either of those guys from what you're hearing?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think with Acaden, man, he's a guy I probably talk to as much as anybody
Okay.
in the DMV area. And what I'll say is, man, I've just been really impressed with how he's kind of handled everything.
Sure.
I don't know. You talk to him and you just like you could talk to him just not even about basketball. You wouldn't even realize, in my opinion, he's. We just got done talking about a damn good point guard in Michael Brown.
Yep.
I think Acaden, especially when you think about long term, is right up there with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those two are the best point guards in the class. You can look at other rankings and see what, my opinion, my rankings, it's those two right there neck and neck with each other. And then the hometown bias might just swing it occasionally.
It helps, yeah.
But no, in terms of just how he has handled it from a maturity standpoint, I've been extremely impressed by. As you mentioned, it's a blue blood recruitment. It's every kid's dream. And when we were to rewind just a year from now, we were talking about Maryland, Georgetown, not to scoff at any of those programs, but when you enter the blue blood world, it's different. Yeah. So
when Kentucky and Duke come calling, it's just a different thing. Yeah.
It's different. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster ride with both Acaden and Eric, which we'll get to next. But I think with how Acaden is wired and what he, in terms of that sense, he's a Hurley guy.
I was thinking the same thing from like day one.
Every day, you as a coach, you can cuss him out. Mm-hmm. You can lean into him. You can go to war every single day with him, and he's not going to complain about his body. He's not going to do any of that. He's just going to keep on, chopping wood. In terms of a playing standpoint, I think that Acaden is best when he is, has the controls in his hands. Now, where that might be, I'm not sure. You just look around, obviously with the Duke thing, there's a lot of different factors with that. With the boozers, there was a lot of noise 3 days ago that look like Miami's got this thing closed up. Duke takes a trip down, sees them, and now they're back. Yeah, they're back very much in the fold. We will see what happens with that. You break down North Carolina, like sure, they're going to lose RJ Davis. Great. And but what is next? Some people are quick to put Elliot Cadeau into the draft. I'm not one of those people. Now, if he stays at UNC and it doesn't work out, who's to say he doesn't look elsewhere? But the fact of the matter is there's still that question. With Duke, there's a fit there. Don't get me wrong. However, you get the boozers, you got to get Cam,
got to get a point guard come with them. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So and then again, who's to say Tyrese isn't going to stay? Tyrese Proctor,
Caleb Foster could still be there. Like these are guys that all need the ball.
Absolutely, Caleb Foster. Because at that point, like, do they really have legitimate draft buzz? Unless they have a ridiculous year, they have legitimate draft buzz. Or I'm not going to sit here at Duke another year, get my NIL, and then I'll figure out what's next. But and then you have Kentucky, and I think Mark Pope is making a very big statement to the country that he is not just coming in here from BYU to just skate by. He's going to go and get the heavy hitters. And I know it was kind of played out to Kentucky fans in terms of like, hey, let's just keep getting the 5-star freshmen. But it's a different approach than what Cal had, right? And his system, his culture, what he is portraying to these freshmen. Now he's got 2 freshmen with a lot of social media buzz around it, and they're openly recruiting the Caleb Wilsons, the Acaden Lewis. Let's come here. Let's form a big, 4, big 5, whoever else they get. So it's going to be interesting, man. But again, I think out of all this, it says to who Acaden is as a person, the way he's handling it with maturity. The visits will be crucial, and then I don't think that Acaden will waste a ton of time. Like, this isn't going to be a recruitment that extends past Christmas.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, he's going to see his options, and then he's going to go ahead and make his decision. But I would say, again, man, it's going to this roller coaster is going to go up and down again. I thought UConn was way ahead. Kentucky comes storming back. You hear the rumors with the boozers, and now like, oh, well, maybe they'll shift gears and maybe they'll start prioritizing Ken more. UNC is doing a good job with recruiting not only Acaden but the other guard who's going to play next to him. So it's there's a lot that's going to be laid out in these next 3 to 4 weeks, and we'll have a lot better feel for that.
It's so interesting, just like what the other dominoes are at play for a specific guy, and that piece of it. Even someone with his level of recruitment, like you look at UConn, I would have guessed that was probably the done deal one based on no intel, just from a hey, look at the pieces and where he fits. He could play next to Aiden Mahaney next year. Diarra leaves, like they have a need for a point guard, and he's someone I do think can play right away. But he was the guy I was most impressed seeing in person last year of anybody, because I saw him have a terrible first half as a team and then single-handedly win them a game. Basically, like he put a team on his back. He scored more. He created easy buckets for guys. Like that's a dude I could see like playing, tomorrow in an NCAA game and just finding a way to like make it work. And like you said, the Dan Hurley fit just seems to make a lot of sense there. So
his development's been really fun to watch, man. I mean, like people forget, and rightfully so. Like when he was at St. John's, from what I remembered him as, was, he definitely could play on the ball, but it was like more so of a combo guard type role. Let me go score. Let me be creative and crafty. But since he had made the shift to Sidwell, playing under Eric Singletary, he goes to Durant. They do a great job with him, and then just as trainers, but really like sitting back and embracing the film portion of the game, and learning how to play the point guard position, because that's hard to do, to the point now where the national guys who are just starting to dive into him, like, oh, he's the only true point guard on the market. And it's like, yo, you have no idea where he came from. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And I don't know. It's just, again, it's another tip to the hat for him, because it's very difficult. We see guys shine in college at the quarterback position. They go to the NFL and it looks like they've never played it before. Making that transition is very difficult. And I would scheme it out the same way as you going from a scoring, mentality or score first approach guard to like, hey, I can do all that still at a really high level, but I need to do other things. I really need to patch up on this other portion of my game. And with it all being from an unselfish standpoint. So it's going to be very, very interesting. I'm with you in terms of, I was like, hey, this is UConn's to lose. Like, he's a UConn kid. But, I can't understate how much of a domino effect this recruiting class is. And I know you follow it closely too, Matt. Like, we've seen previous classes like, oh, man, that decision is going to affect player A. But like this year, it's going to affect player A, B, C, D, and then I can kind of piece where they're going to go. It's fun. It makes it fun, but it's hectic, and everybody's just holding on to their guns, waiting for the first one to flinch. And once someone flinches, we'll be good. But until then, it's the roller coaster.
It's got to make crystal balls harder than ever for everybody across the board, because you can't just kind of map out like there's this one guy in the way. Like it's like you said, there's 5 other connected pieces to it.
Yep. And I mean, then you got kids that you thought were decided. The one, another program comes in for an in-home visit and everything changes overnight where you didn't even hear about it. You know what I mean? So it's all part of the game.
Eric Reibe is the next one. He's huge. He's skilled. The first time I saw this dude, it was like, holy shit, how is Harvard his only offer at this, or whatever the case was at the time? Like, not the disrespect Harvard, but like, it just seemed like a guy that made sense at like a high Power 5 level. Now, I didn't know he'd get to the point where he was also a full, blue blood recruitment only, but that was one where I just couldn't understand, where like Maryland wasn't like all the way in from day one. And now it makes a little more sense with the Derik Queen piece, especially if they expect him to be there for 2 years. But still, I would have taken the hard stance there and just worried about fit and stuff later. But any update on Eric?
Well, I would say this, and obviously Eric is skilled. Eric is good. Eric is one of the best bigs. He would be one of the best bigs in any class that he is in.
Yep.
I think with how shallow the pool of bigs are, centers in this class,
props that up a little bit,
makes him even more valuable, right? So, I mean, even before, and they were monitoring him, but even before the June live period down at the Matha for DMV Live, you heard that schools were interested in him, but during that weekend or both those weekends, when Dan Hurley came walking in, when Kansas was heavy in a presence, when you name it was coming in to see Eric, then it was real. Now I'll say, obviously there was a ton of buzz after his Kansas visit. Hey, did they get it done? I definitely think Eric is going to see out the process. If I, and take his visits and see what every school can offer him. in terms of like the best fit without me, I would say factoring in other things, like Creighton is the easy low hanging fruit to me. Is like, Eric,
Brenner replacement kind of thing, and
you can go there and you can play your game. You're going to have a lot of freedom, and you're going to be able to really expand your skill set as well. You'll play inside, you'll play out. Whereas, but then you have Kansas, which is the easy. Hunter Dickinson leaves, Eric steps in, but they also have some other factors in there that are like, hey, can he really play with, other guys who will be there next year? Mm-hmm. So, you kind of start breaking stuff down. Then you see that the due diligence that UConn staff has been doing these past few weeks, making multiple trips down to see him and meet with him in person. The easy low-hanging fruit there is, hey, you can be our Donovan Clingan. You know what I mean? So there, as time has gone on, there's been a lot more clarity to where Eric fits and who's going to prioritize him. I wouldn't sleep on Indiana either. Okay. They have a hefty NIL situation over there.
They seem to be getting in on everybody lately, especially from around here too.
Yep. And obviously with them, Balo will be gone next year. They have the track record with, getting where, picked in the draft and the lottery. I don't think, Balo is going to be a lottery pick or even a draft pick. But hey, if they were able to develop him into that, that's another argument that they can make for Eric. And then you have Oregon. Oregon's like the sneaky dark horse that to me that I've been hearing about. And it's just, back to say a Creighton pitch where like, hey man, you can come in here, you can play your game, we'll allow you the freedom. There are some things against that, but the one major factor that's for it, Nike is right there. And I'm not saying that, he played on the Puma circuit, but with all that NIL, Phil Knight backing it, that certainly doesn't worsen the deal. But it's still, I would say it's still very open. Kansas and Connecticut, or UConn, as people would say, are the ones that are gaining the most steam. We've seen in the past, if Bill Self really wants a guy, he's going to get it done. I think he really wants Eric, but we're going to see how much of a fight that UConn and the dark horses, I would say plural, with Creighton and Oregon, how they kind of play into the mix.
Exactly what you said at the beginning of this. I just assumed that if you're a big and Kansas says they want you, you just lock it in. I mean, just given the track record they've had of developing, bigs and Self, especially, like, schemes for those guys so well to put them in a spotlight to look great. So that's kind of what I assumed. But, like you said, there's so many different factors at play here. And that same thing is true about all the other domino effects and things like that. So yeah, going to be interesting to see how that one plays out. Just switching gears here real quickly. It never makes no sense asked in the chat. Any chance that Parker Robinson commits early after his Adidas Next Gen tournament?
It means after the one that he just had?
I guess after the big tournament he just had, is Maryland going to try to lock this one down?
So Maryland's definitely on him. They love him. They should. I think he is a guy who can come in and be, again, not to the degree that Chris Jeffrey is in terms of physicality standpoint, but in terms of fluidity offensively, you can put Parker in and he can play a little on the ball. He's better off the ball. Coming off screens for threes. That's where we saw him really shine in the ANGT this past, I would say, early summer. But there are a lot more schools that are getting involved with him. I will say this, that Parker comes from a Big Ten family. He was born in Indiana, and I might mix this up, but I want to say that his father went to Purdue. His mom is Michigan State.
Okay. So everybody's got an angle here, right?
Correct. And so Indiana's going to get involved. They like him. Obviously, the two alum, the alum schools from his parents, they will get in. Purdue already offered. I'm not sure if Michigan State did or not, but I know that they were down to see him recently. Okay. And then, I've talked to other Power 5 schools, whether it's been in the SEC or the ACC, that go and watch him. The issue, if you're a Maryland fan, is when other schools watch him play, they fall in love with him, but then you talk to him and you get a feel for his personality and you like him even more. So that is going to up the ante in terms of, how many schools are going to get involved with him. Now, what I were to think, after that, Adidas Next Gen Tournament performance, I thought he was going to blow up because I thought he was spectacular. And not to say he hadn't played like that in the past, but it was the way that he did it with the efficiency and the maturity off the ball is what really stood out to me. And I thought every program watching would be like, look, this kid can play for us no matter what kind of system you run. But it's going to be a long list of suitors. I don't see him committing early. That's not what he's going to do. Okay. He's going to go and play, another season of AAU. He's down at overtime elite, which can both help and hurt Maryland's chances. But ultimately, it's going to be a long list. I think Big Ten schools have a leg up just with the family that he comes from. But who's to say, another school doesn't come in here and paint a picture that he loves. So I will say it's not like I wanted to bring the background up because it's not like he's tied to Maryland. He hasn't lived here his entire life. But with that being said, he does love the area.
No, that's great context there. That's a guy I've never seen actually play, so I'm adding him to my list of guys I check out a little bit more this year.
No, you got to dig up the film. Play with Mellow 16s this past year. One of the leading scorers, I know at least throughout the spring sessions. But he's just a bucket, man. Like he can get it done from three. He's sneaky athletic, and he'll put it on your head. And he's like 6'2", 6'3". I joke with him all the time because when I saw him at Good Counsel as a freshman, and everybody was blowing him up. See, the crazy part is Good Counsel had him and Nico Mundy as freshmen, and you could see it right away with Nico. With Parker, it was a lot of efficiency, but I was like, dude, you look like a kid from California who surfs. You know what I mean? And then he just comes out and he eats your heart out and he competes and he's just fun to watch. So like I said, there are going to be a lot of fan bases that want Parker on their team.
That's cool. All right, I'm adding him to the watch list right up after we get off the recording here. Last two guys I want to talk about with you real quick are probably the two biggest names in the DMV, just in terms of their pro potential long term. You've got Nate Ament playing in Virginia and Baba Oladotun here at Blake High School in Maryland. Just can you talk a little bit about both guys? And then if I'm going to put you on the spot here, a little bit, Colby, they're obviously different classes, but is one of them a better long term prospect than the other, in your opinion? I haven't seen them both. I guess just where are we kind of at with these guys? I know they're both, Baba's top one, in some rankings list, and Nate's top 7 or 8, but things change a lot in a year. I guess, are these really guys that you expect to finish in the top 10 of their classes when it's all said and done?
Yeah, but I think I'll say this. You put Nate as a sophomore next to Baba now, it's not a question. Baba is much more ahead of the curve. Okay. However, these past few, months or year of Nate's development has been remarkable. And I'm not going to say it just came out from left field. You always saw it, and you saw the stature, and you saw my thing was he was always a menace in the mid post on he could always fade to either shoulder and make tough shots, but it was getting the confidence to play out on the perimeter a lot more with the ball in his hands, not just as a pick and pop guy. And once he got that confidence and his feet under him in that sense, that's when everything took off. Also, he got a little bit more of an edge to him on the defensive end, because my issue with him early on was hey, I don't know if obviously the frame doesn't scream physicality.
Sure.
But you can also, there's a thing called skinny strong too.
Yeah, exactly.
And, if you have some skinny strong to you and some toughness, you're going to be fine. Say a Brandon Ingram. A Brandon Ingram is a skinny strong, and he's, he ain't going to deal with the nonsense. He's not going to get pushed around. Yeah. You might move him, but he's going to stick in there. So I think that's where Nate is kind of headed in terms of, again, I think, he's another one with an interesting recruitment, but I think Nate is going to go wherever he is allowed to play with the ball a lot. Okay. Because that's the development point that he wants to really focus on in terms of upping his pro potential, as you mentioned. I mean,
everybody wants that big wing who can create and run offense and stuff like that too.
Depending on where you look, Matt, I mean, you could, it's AJ, and then it's Nate, and then some people are even saying well, is Nate's ceiling higher? And I don't want to get into that. Sure. I still think AJ is the no brainer in that sense. And I don't even want to say no brainer because like here comes Cam Boozer who doesn't do
Incredible.
anything but win games no matter
Yeah.
what. So again, we're talking in that top 3 conversation for a draft standpoint. And I think he just has so many tools. Now, shifting gears to Baba, he's much more advanced. He's much more fluid, confident, put together, even though he is very skinny at this point as well. But just from a skill standpoint, he's ahead of where Nate was.
Okay.
I want to reiterate, Nate in the past 8 to 10 to 12 months has really put it together. But the one thing that I was really pleased by with Baba is, and for those who are watching or who are local, like you look above me like, he goes to Blake High School, like what's going on?
Yeah.
And then you say, hey, look it up in your map on your iPhone. It's 40 minutes away. Let's go catch a game. And you go out there to watch. I went out to quite a few last year to watch him as a freshman, but I did go to a big game when they were playing Sherwood on Sherwood's senior night. They had 5 seniors, and Blake went in and upset them in that game, which was an upset. My biggest takeaway was like Baba didn't force anything. And you have a kid of his ilk playing at a public school scene.
Right. He could take 35 shots if he wanted to.
Right. Which really isn't even the best public school scene in the state either.
No.
And the fact that, if he got a quick swing and the guy was, he might have had a 6'4" power forward on him too, he could just rise over the top and let it go. Yeah. But he'd swing it, he'd side it, he'd go through the offense and look for the best shot. That spoke a lot to me. Yeah, now, I will say, he gets on with Durant, which was a freaking talented 15U team. And, comes a little trigger happy when he gets out in front of the EYBL lights.
Sure.
But what I will say is, like, there's clearly a lot to work with there. And I think absolutely, whereas like when Nate was a sophomore, there was no mentions of pro potential. Yeah. I mean, in the grand scheme of things in the here and now, with Baba, when you say that, it's like, no, I mean, I can definitely see it. See it.
No, that's really cool. Same thing. I watched a lot of the 17 and under team that Nate was on, and it's probably the best Team USA created at any level ever in terms of how awesome they were. And Nate barely played.
Yeah.
But when he got in, you could see it. Like he could handle, he could shoot it. He wasn't afraid to pull shots from guys from like really deep. And it's like, okay, I can picture that as an NBA player. So it's cool.
No doubt.
Just Colby, last thing for you, maybe, is there like one guy that, hey, this is my guy that I think people are, I mean, I'm sure you could list a bunch of guys, but like if you just had to throw one out here for us that maybe people aren't super familiar with, that it's a guy you think is being like really under recruited locally.
Let me,
or a fun prospect, or just a name that you kind of like keep coming back to, or you're hearing a lot more from people lately, or anything like that.
For sure. No, I mean, I will say this. So, and he recently came off the board, but the one that always had piqued my interest just based off of aesthetics was Adlan Elamine from PVI, who just committed to Utah State. But I mean, you scroll, through the local names, and a lot of these guys are starting their recruitment is already taken form. But what I will say is if you take a step back, I'll mention 2 names. One is Riley Jacobs from St. Stephen's, St. Agnes. Mm-hmm. Been interesting. Just been an interesting recruitment, I would say. He was getting some A10 buzz. He just got an offer from UMass Lowell yesterday. But a 6'8", 6'9", 4-man, had a really good year for New World, put up ridiculous numbers during DMV Live. Very capable, shot blocker, finishes above the rim. I think he's just a tad back. I would say a tad behind on his development to where, like, if we're having a conversation 2 years from now and Riley is in a Power 5 program, it wouldn't shock me at all. I think he's one of those type of kids that once the rubber meets the road, he gets into a college conditioning program, it's going to take off. The other name that I would watch for here closely is, because I'm very interested to see how the recent activities are going to spark others. Grant Polk from St. Albans. Again, he had visits to Chattanooga. He's at Florida Gulf Coast today, and now he still has he's got a visit to George Washington in early October. However, last night South Carolina offers.
Wow.
And so, obviously that's a big one for him.
Sure.
Now, again, I think we're past the days of like a copycat league where we always would see one offer come in and then a bunch of them come in. However, Grant is a 6'7" sniper.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you're that big and you can shoot it, any team in the country seems like they could find room for you.
Correct. And like my thing is, I mean, I'm pretty sure he led the 3 SSB 17s in 3-point efficiency. Then you consider, I mean, this is just off the top of my head, 80% of his shots are coming from there. Like, that's impressive stuff. So, there are some shortcomings there. Whereas, like, I there's other programs that maybe could get in the mix, but like, hey, we'll let him go mid-major and we'll keep an eye on him. Yeah. But South Carolina doesn't seem to be doing that. So he may visit there next weekend. But it could be interesting one where, they say, hey, South Carolina offer. Okay, well,
should we look at him?
We need a shooter, and if these teams are going to start tracking transfers immediately. I mean, they already are. But if they're in need of a shooter and they can see like, hey, if South Carolina's on them and they're impressing him and what we have in our resources, let's just go get them. We could see another one. So those are two guys. I've always been a fan of Riley's because I think he's a really big two-way player, impact player. But with Grant, we could see something pop overnight here.
Yeah, those are both great names and two guys I definitely see the appeal and why you like them. So that makes sense to me a lot too. So what you just said there was so interesting, Colby. Like I definitely get hey, we're recruiting a guy, and if we don't keep him, we'll keep an eye on him the next time. But the recruiting a guy to have it in with him the next time he's willing to transfer is a really interesting nugget, and it makes sense the teams would do that. I just kind of hadn't thought of it that way. I'm
telling you, man. I mean, that's kind of what I've been telling to high schools or even college coaches. Is like, as sad as this may sound, if you're a mid-major minus, and you get a great player, like you got to kind of view yourself as a JUCO in a way, because it's just where we are with everything. But there's but then again, you get something back because the
more talented freshmen than they would have gotten in years past too.
Yeah, well, yes, obviously, yep, you get that. Like a local program who I think has done just an outstanding job to their culture is Towson. Like the class that they're putting together is, I mean, you get Jaquan Womack from PVI, who's a Pat Scarry creative player. That's what you would make. John Barton from St. John's, who is a linebacker who can play the guard position. They're still in it with a couple more guys. I mean, they got Brandon Holmes from Mount St. Joe. He'll be more of a little bit of a developmental piece, if I would say. And then they're in with one other name that if they get this guy, it's like, okay, now we're really cooking here. But those are guys where they bought into them, and those guys should be there for the majority, if not all of their college careers. And those are very hard to find at this point.
Yeah, it's smart. You got to do a different kind of due diligence now if you're a mid-major staff, just to find those kind of multi-year guys for you.
Yep.
Colby, if people want more of this kind of content, which they should if they're hoops junkies listening to this, where can they find all your work?
Yeah, I mean, I try to be active on Twitter at Colby G Hoops. I would urge everybody to subscribe for Made Hoops. I do a lot of scouting stuff over there for our service, but also cover the recruitment of just a lot of different guys nationally. And then of course, for the more specific Maryland coverage, Inside Maryland Sports with Jeff Ehrman. Guy does a great job. And we just try to cover every little, development that comes our way that has to do with Maryland basketball and recruiting.
We appreciate it. It's a service for us fans. Basketball has become a 12-month a year thing at this point. So you guys are keeping us well fed with the updates. So thank you. And thanks for the time here. I didn't plan to go an hour, but I could probably ask you another hour's worth of questions. So thank you.
I could go an hour too, Matt. So no, I definitely appreciate it, man. I wanted to say, I think what you're doing is great. I love that, you're getting different platforms to speak on as well and to write on. It's well deserved. I think a lot of people who would tell me, hey, man, why don't you start your own podcast? Like, I don't want anything to do with the time and the effort that it takes to like make a podcast. People probably just think you plug your computer in and we connect and that's it. Like, there's a lot of work that goes into podcasting, being consistent with it, having a show every week. And I think what you do in terms of getting college coaches, college players from all levels, high school, high school players, high school coaches, is really cool, man. And it's unique. And I just want to say, hats off to you. And I think a lot of people can benefit from what you're doing.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, man. It's fun to do. There's so many cool guys here to talk about. So you never run out of material in this area. So that's a nice plus.
No doubt.
All right, everybody, if you're watching this on YouTube, click the like button for us. We always appreciate rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we're presented by betonline.ag. We'll catch y'all next time.